Okay, let's unpack this. We're about to dig into a case that, well, truly captivated the nation, didn't it? One fills with these chilling details and some really unexpected turns that have only recently come to light. It's a story that went from just a shocking, almost senseless crime to this painstaking investigation, and then culminated in a plea deal I think few really anticipated. Yeah. So today we're taking a deep dive into the Idaho murders case. Our focus is going to be specifically on the details from BRYAN KOHBERGER'S police interview that were released, and, the surprising way the legal proceedings finally wrapped up. It's a chance for us and for you to understand not just what happened, but maybe some of the fascinating and, frankly, often unsettling nuances hidden in those official records.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we've pulled together a pretty comprehensive set of sources. We're drawing from official Moscow Police Department documents, the ones detailing Kohberger's arrest in that initial interrogation, and we're pairing that with various news reports that tracked the investigation's evolution, his defense strategies, and of course, the recent sentencing. It really gives a fuller picture of the whole journey.
That's right. And our goal here is to pull out the most important sort of nuggets of knowledge and insight from all these sources. We want to give you a concise but still thorough understanding of what actually transpired, what got revealed along the way, and how this incredibly high-profile case finally reached its conclusion. We'll definitely explore the surprising aspects of his first encounter with the police, the evidence that actually led to the arrest, and that long legal road that ended with the guilty plea and sentencing. So let's set the scene. It's December 2022. Authorities have finally managed to link a car to that horrific crime scene, and their focus is narrowing on to BRYAN KOHBERGER. The moment they arrest him at his parents' place in Pennsylvania, it wasn't just a legal turning point. It was really the start of an interrogation that revealed some, well, truly bizarre details. What actually happened when they first sat down with him?
It was certainly unexpected. That police interview, it was conducted by Corporal Brett Payne and an Idaho State Police Detective Sergeant Darren Gilbertson. And it revealed some genuinely surprising stuff right from the get-go. According to the documents, Kohberger just immediately started engaging in what the officers called small talk about college sports, of all things. He mentioned he wasn't a big WSU football fan, that's Washington State University, but liked baseball. And what's really striking, I think, is that he actually asked them, quote, if it was okay to engage in small talk like we were.
He asked them.
Yeah, and they said it was fine.
That's incredible. And he also told them, didn't he, that he'd never even been to the Pacific Northwest before moving there for his PhD program at WSU, but then claimed he'd formed this deep connection to the area. What do you even make of someone offering up these kinds of personal, almost philosophical thoughts in, the intense context of an arrest?
It's highly unusual, isn't it? Just really stands out. He even expanded on that connection, apparently talking about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. He apparently said he was raised Christian, but was always a skeptic, except when confronted with the beauty of the natural world.
Wow.
And then on top of that, he starts talking about his interest in criminology, how he got into criminal justice, even thinking about maybe being a police officer someday, adding that he wouldn't commit unless he was, quote, absolutely sure.
So strange.
Yeah, this kind of, this mismatch, the mundane small talk about sports, nature, career ideas versus the sheer gravity of why he's sitting there. It's the kind of thing investigators really zero in on. They're looking for patterns, maybe signs of a state of mind, or maybe even, a deliberate attempt to control or manipulate the situation.
And the tone definitely shifted away from that almost casual chat. The reports say Kohberger then stated he, quote, understood why we were engaging in small talk, but would appreciate it if we explained to him what he was doing there. So after all that, how did the detectives finally, cut to the chase?
Well, Detective Gilbertson just directly asked him if he watched the news. And Kohberger's reply was just simple, I watched the news.
Okay. And then came that pivotal moment, right? When the detectives made it crystal clear why they were actually there. They told him it was, quote, because of what happened in November just off the University of Idaho campus.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Kohberger's immediate response was just, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, like indicating he completely understood. He then told them he was aware of a homicide because of a WSU alert he received right after the murders happened. Which, this raises an important question. If he already knew about it from an alert, why all the preceding small talk? And what does that quick of course really tell us about his actual awareness, his internal processing at that moment?
You're right. That is quite telling. And when they asked if he wanted to actually discuss the incident, Kohberger didn't hesitate, did he? He immediately invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, stated, I think I would need a lawyer, and really emphasize that, quote, it was constitutional right to speak to an attorney.
Exactly. But even after invoking his rights, the documents show Kohberger kept pushing. He persistently questioned what specifically we wanted to talk to him about and the reason. Even after they told him, look, the interview's over because you asked for a lawyer, he asked again. It shows this desire for more information, almost like he was trying to figure out exactly what they knew before completely shutting down communication.
Yeah, that odd first encounter really sets a peculiar tone, doesn't it? But to really get why authorities were zeroing in on Kohberger, we should probably briefly recap the horrific events that started this whole thing. We're talking about 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus house back in November 2022. The sources remind us, the night before their bodies were found, Goncalves and Mogen were out at a local sports bar while Kernodle and Chapin were at a fraternity party. By about 2 a.m. on November 13th, all 4 were back at that 3-story rental home.
And the critical piece of evidence, the thing that ultimately pointed investigators towards Kohberger, was DNA. Specifically, DNA found on a knife sheath that was just left behind at the crime scene. That was a massive breakthrough, really put them squarely on his trail.
And the way they actually use that DNA is pretty fascinating too, isn't it? When it didn't match anyone in the standard FBI databases, authorities had to get, well, creative. They turned to public ancestry websites. You know, the ones people use for genealogy to generate a list of potential relatives, which eventually led them towards him. Then, after learning Kohberger had driven across the country to his parents' home in Pennsylvania for the holidays, local officials there collected trash from the family residence to get a sample and confirm that DNA link.
It's really a testament to modern forensic work and how these genetic genealogy techniques can push investigations forward.
Absolutely, and that DNA link was clearly the game changer. But beyond that, what other evidence was crucial in building the case against him? Things the judge later refused to suppress.
Well, the sources mentioned quite a bit. Things like cell phone records, email records, surveillance footage from various locations, even his Amazon purchase history. All of these pieces were used to meticulously try and connect Kohberger to the crime, tracking his movements and activities.
The sources also bring up the 2 surviving roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke, who were actually in the house when the murders occurred. There were unsealed text messages from Mortensen showing her trying to reach her roommates that morning, and her chilling account of actually seeing a masked man in the house. Plus, the details from the 911 call, which wasn't placed until hours later. It described a roommate who was thought to be passed out and drunk and mentioned that they saw some man in their house last night. It just paints a really difficult, confusing picture of those early hours after the attack. Now let's shift to some of the more striking revelations that emerged during the legal process. One piece of evidence introduced back in March 2025 was particularly jarring. A selfie Kohberger apparently took the morning right after the murders.
Yeah, that was something else.
He's pictured in front of a shower, giving a thumbs up, and supposedly aligned with a witness description of the perpetrator having bushy eyebrows. What does an act like that even suggest?
It's incredibly unsettling, isn't it? Kaylee Goncalves' father, Steve Goncalves, had a very strong reaction to that selfie. He called it a trophy. His belief was that Kohberger might have even returned to the crime scene area, saw that no one had called 911 yet, and was essentially celebrating getting away with it. This kind of trophy-taking, if that interpretation is right, is something criminologists often study. It can suggest an extreme level of audacity, maybe a perverse sense of accomplishment.
And adding to that disturbing picture, there was a Dateline documentary that revealed details from Kohberger's internet browsing history. Searches for Ted Bundy, the notorious serial killer, Britney Spears' song Criminal, and even searches for University of Idaho murders itself. What does that kind of digital footprint imply about his mindset or his interest in these specific crimes?
Well, it certainly paints a very specific and frankly dark picture. It suggests maybe a fascination with infamous killers and perhaps even with the very crime he stood accused of committing. There was also that peculiar text message Kohberger sent way back in July 2022 to a former classmate named Holly. She described it as overly formal. He was asking her about hiking trips, apparently. It just struck her as really odd, coming from someone she barely knew. Almost like he was, I don't know, awkwardly trying to force some kind of connection or maybe even establish some kind of benign presence or alibi down the line. Just speculation, of course, but it stood out.
Okay, moving toward the defense's arguments, Kohberger's initial legal team put forward a very specific and some might say unusual claim
Yeah.
that he has autism spectrum disorder, ASD.
Yeah.
How exactly did they try to use that diagnosis in his defense strategy?
Right. So what's fascinating here is how they elaborated on that claim. They argued his ASD meant he displayed things like extremely rigid thinking, that he perseverates on specific topics, meaning he gets stuck on them. Also, that he processes information on a piecemeal basis, struggles to plan ahead, and demonstrates, quote, little insight into his own behaviors and emotions.
Okay.
Their core argument was that these characteristics, stemming from his diagnosed disability, created an unconscionable risk. A risk that, if the case went to a death penalty trial, he might be executed because of misunderstandings related to his disability, rather than purely based on his level of culpability for the crime itself. It was definitely a strategy aimed at challenging the perception of his intent and his overall responsibility, particularly concerning the death penalty aspect.
The whole trial schedule seemed quite dynamic for a while there. Kohberger initially pleaded not guilty, right? Then he later waived his right to a speedy trial, which pushed things back. And the trial itself got moved out of Lada County, where the killings happened, over to Ada County because of concerns about presumed prejudice among potential jurors there. But then came that really significant turn.
That's right, the plea deal. Completely unexpected for many observers, and it canceled the planned trial altogether. The terms were pretty straightforward. Kohberger agreed to plead guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder, plus 1 count of burglary. And in exchange for that plea, he gave up his rights to appeal the conviction and sentence, and also gave up the right to ask for any kind of leniency or reduction in his prison sentence later on.
A major shift.
A huge shift, especially given how high-profile the case was and the prosecution's initial stated intent to seek the death penalty.
He officially entered those guilty pleas on July 2nd, 2025. And Judge Hippler specifically asked him, for each victim, if he killed them willingly, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice with forethought, basically, confirming he acted with clear intent and ill will. And for each count, Kohberger's response was just a firm yes.
Sentencing followed just a few weeks later, on July 23, 2025. Judge Hippler handed down 4 consecutive life sentences with absolutely no possibility of parole for the 4 murder counts. On top of that, there were hefty fines, $50,000 per murder count, and a $5,000 civil penalty ordered to be paid to each victim's family. He also got an additional 10 years and another $50,000 fine for the burglary charge.
And Judge Stephen Hippler didn't mince words at that sentencing, did he? He delivered a really stern statement calling Kohberger the worst of the worst. Oh, no. And he pointedly noted Kohberger's complete lack of any visible remorse or regret. That must have been incredibly raw and difficult for the family sitting there.
Oh, absolutely, and it's really important to acknowledge their reaction. The reporting indicates the families of the victims effectively slammed the decision by the prosecution to offer a plea deal, because that deal is what took the death penalty off the table. Their desire for what they saw as full justice, the ultimate penalty, was clearly impacted by this resolution. You can absolutely understand their perspective.
Right. So what does this all mean now, looking back? Despite this legal conclusion, a clear motive for why this horrific attack happened, well, it hasn't been detailed publicly.
No.
And there's still a gag order in place, preventing many people directly involved from speaking openly about the case specifics. It leaves us, and you, with a lot still to ponder, doesn't it? We've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the surprising, almost unsettling details of BRYAN KOHBERGER'S initial police interview, through the methodical investigation that pieced things together, to the defense's unique arguments involving ASD, and finally that unexpected plea deal and the life sentences.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think understanding the minutia, the details of a case like this really matters. It gives us a window into how facts actually unfold in a major investigation, how different types of evidence, DNA, digital footprints, witness accounts are meticulously gathered and used to connect individuals to crimes. And it shows how the justice system, with all its complexities, navigates these incredibly difficult and horrific events. It highlights the immense effort that goes into seeking accountability, even when the full why might remain elusive to the public.
Exactly. And maybe it leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given that detailed account of BRYAN KOHBERGER'S initial police interview, the small talk, the interest in law enforcement, the comments about nature's beauty, what does that tell you about the human capacity for contradiction? Or perhaps the masks people wear, especially when they're facing accusations this grave? And maybe more importantly, what does the absence of a clear, publicly stated motive leave us to ponder about the very nature of such heinous crimes, particularly when the legal chapter is closed, But that fundamental question, the why, still hangs in the air.